Let's jump to Vietnam. I once did a survey of the history books in our school system in West Haven, and they all had the standard myth about our valiant troops defending the valiant Republic of South Vietnam against this aggression from the North. What do you say about Vietnam in your book?
Well, of course, what I say about Vietnam goes against the story that you're telling me you found in the history books. You know, the usual story of, you know, we, the United States, are the good guys. Whatever we do in the world is for somebody's benefit, for freedom and democracy and self-determination. And I point out in my chapter on Vietnam that the motives for going into Vietnam were not to bring liberty and democracy to the Vietnamese. They were not even to stop the spread of communism, because that was sort of ludicrous when you thought that here was China with 1 billion people already communist, and here was North Vietnam already communist, and we were going to expend thousands of lives to prevent communism from moving from North Vietnam to South Vietnam. And there was something absurd about that, something absurd about the idea that whether South Vietnam went communist or not would be a great either boon or blow to the world communist movement. And when you looked into the story behind the Vietnam War, well, if you simply read the Pentagon Papers, which were the Defense Department's secret history of the Vietnam War, the government's own documents show that the real motives for going into Vietnam were geostrategic, geopolitical. The words that kept cropping up in the memos that went back and forth from the National Security Council to the State Department, the words kept coming up to explain our interest in Southeast Asia were tin, rubber, and oil. That is all those valuable resources in Southeast Asia, and it was thought that having a military base in South Vietnam would be useful in having better access to those strategic materials. In other words, the war in Vietnam was based on the same fundamental economic motives that have generally fueled our wars, just as the war against Mexico in 1846 was not a war for noble cause, as was presented to the American people, but it was a war for land, to take a good part of Mexican's territory, which we did at the end of the war. The war against Spain was not really to liberate Cuba, but was to get American corporate power into Cuba, and so on. Well, just as today, the war in Iraq presented as a war of, who knows, to end the Saddam dictatorship or to bring democracy to the Iraqis, and it's not hard to see that the real motive is oil. My chapter on Vietnam explores the professed motives for going into Vietnam and the real reasons for going in, and also tries to give some picture of the terrible devastation we caused to the people of Vietnam and the huge waste of life in our country of 58,000 Americans dead for a very ignoble cause.
Who comes across the best in your book? Do you have some heroes that we can all admire?
Well, the heroes in my book are not presidents. They're not notable political figures. The heroes in my book are working people, labor organizers, socialists, anti-war people. The heroes in my book are Eugene Debs, the socialist who went to prison for opposing World War I, Helen Keller, who also opposed World War I.
You know that she's the only socialist, left socialist, on a U.S. quarter?
I didn't know she was on a U.S. quarter.
Absolutely, on one of these state quarters, Alabama.
Oh, no, well, of course she's from Alabama, but I didn't know. That's interesting. I'm glad I'm learning something from this conversation. But yeah, it's interesting that in American education, nobody learns about Helen Keller as a socialist. You know, they learn about her as a handicapped kid who became famous, but you never hear that she was a socialist agitator against war. So, yeah, my heroes are people like that. My heroes are the black people in the South who fought against, racial segregation. And so it's a whole different set of heroes.
Well, this is great, and but I don't want to tire you out. I know you're going to speak again tonight. Thank you very much for this interview.
Well, nice talking with you.